again, the untimely death of Alekhine. So the question is what to do, how to resolve the current situation. And the FIDE decided, well, it was time for them to react, to respond. And from all around the world at that time, the delegates of all of the national countries got together to make the determination of what to do for the World Championship. So very few people actually know this, but the FIDE convened their General Congress. They got together and they determined the most sensible thing to do was to make Max Erva the world champion, because he held the world championship. He lost it to Alekhine. Alekhine dies. They give the world championship title to Max Erva. It passed, so it was official. Max Erva was the world champion. The Soviet delegation arrived a day late. So they weren't on the original vote, and they say, hey, wait a minute, wait a minute, time out, let's do this whole thing again. Let's open up for consideration, blah, blah, blah. And Max Erva didn't feel that he deserved to be world champion. I mean, okay, I mean, yeah, I mean, if you force it on me, but it's not like, you know, I'm the best player or anything. Let's organize an event to determine the best player. That was where the 5 top players, Botvinnik, Smyslov, Keres, Max Erva, and Botvinnik was the runaway winner. I mean, it was clear that he won. And then the idea of this whole 3-year cycle that continued all the way up to Bobby Fischer and Anatoly Karpov, Garry Kasparov, etc. So Botvinnik's the world champion. Now they got to find him a challenger, and instead of willy-nilly, I'll accept you, I won't accept you, they organized these interzonals and candidates tournament, and David Bronstein was the challenger. So this was the first match under the new cycle, the non-Alekhine cycle. And again, you got to kind of place yourself in the mindset of the two players. Mikhail Botvinnik was this extraordinarily determined, severe, scientific, correct, orthodox man. I mean, he was the Soviets' prototype, you know, of correct play, correct behavior, correct thought. Versus David Bronstein. The root of all evil. The total creative, tactically genius guy who's just doing. I mean, you can't, David was just an amazing, amazing person, and it has been a great honor and a pleasure to have many, many, many conversations with David and to be able to analyze with him. I unfortunately never played against David. We analyzed a lot, but well, there you go. And so here we have Mr. Correct versus Mr. Incorrect. Okay. We've all done this. On the world stage, David blunders a whole rook. It's like, do I resign at move 10? He's a rook down, a whole rook down. Do I resign at move 10 and the shortest loss in, you know, world championship history, or do I just struggle on for a few more moves until my opponent kills me? Well, let's find out, shall we? This is a very funny game. D4, E6, C4, F5. In the 1951 match, extraordinarily enough, it was like both players liked to play the Dutch. And they were arguing about this position with colors reversed. Earlier, decades earlier, you will recall that Jose Raul Capablanca and Alexander Alekhine, in their match, like 30 out of the 36 games were Queen's Gambit declines. You know, now they had moved further. Now they were into Dutch territory. Okay, so the consideration at that time was the best way to counter the Dutch was to fianchetto the king's bishop. So here we go, bishop b7. Now, what had happened earlier in their matches is that earlier games from their matches, from this position, what Bronstein was doing was playing d6, queen to e8, and oftentimes heading for e5. So what Botvinnik did is to cross up his opponent to get him out of that scheme of d6, queen e8, maybe queen comes to h5. He made the tempo space gaining move d5 right away. Okay, so what his idea was is that when the pawn was back, if he had played knight f3, d6, castles, queen e8, it wasn't easy for him to play e4. What he really wants from David is he wants to see the move e5 so that he could then play e4, where it's much easier for him to play e4 now than when the knight is on f3. So that's what he wants. So on the mind of Bronstein comes bishop b4. I mean, okay, I'll two-step my way to the b4 square, and I'll invite a queen trade if white wants that. Okay, bishop b4, bishop d2, e5. So now, you know, the desirable e4 has issues. That is to say, I can take on e4. I get a good knight in the middle of the board. So e2, e3. d7, d6, knight here, a6. In my opinion, this was a bad move. Oh, okay. Let's see, just a second. Hold on, where's my glasses? I want to make sure that the line I gave, it's in here. Yes, okay, good. Okay, so this is typical Bronstein, trying to be creative. Okay. In fact, the position's not bad for black at all. It's not bad for white. It's very clear that white intends to play a3, bishop takes, to recapture either with the knight or with the bishop. It's not so certain which is the best way to recapture, but you win the two bishops, and so forth and so on. So if you look at the position from the point of view of the pawn structure, it's rather clear that black's play, by and large, really is directed kingside. So ideas like f5, f4 in the position, e5, e4, you can bring a knight to the e5 square, and so forth and so on. But Bronstein comes up with a6, like, what's that? Suddenly, you know, David wants to play on the queen side with b5, which is actually white's provenance, thanks to this c4 pawn. I don't like that move. I think the best move was I think the best move was actually knight a6. We'll display a few moves that I thought were sensible ones. Let's say a3, let's say trade, let's say b4. So now you've got, you know, your bishop on this knight. You've won the two bishops. You got this bishop there. You got ideas, f3. You've got other ideas, maybe like f4 to open up that diagonal, but it's black's turn. Knight g4. White has an issue on the f2 pawn, castles, and now queen g5. I thought that this was a very harmonious play for both sides, because it's very clear that, you know, as white wants to play c5, black wants to play over here on the king side and open things up. I felt the position was rather balanced, dynamically balanced. That's not what happened. Instead, we had a6, and now the very correct Botvinnik is completely out of his normal routines. He comes up with a bad move. He plays queen c2. Much simpler was to simply play queen. Oops, simpler was. Where's my annotation?
Go to notation up there. That person. Oh.
Okay, notation up there. Simpler was a3 takes knight bd7, and I think black is doing okay, reasonably. So, and I think that this is more or less, I'm not going to say dead even or anything like that. It's balanced. It's weird. Black has an idea of e5, e4, knight to e5, and putting his knights nicely in the center of the board. Not what Botvinnik did. In my opinion, Botvinnik made a poor decision with the move queen c2, and he didn't understand that the idea of a6 had two ideas. The first idea is to play for b5, obviously what David is playing for. The second idea was that David wanted to put his bishop on a7. Like, huh? Queen e8, f2, f3. Already, I'm not too sure if I like that move either. b5, queen b3, bishop c5. Now, I don't know what you can call this defense, but you can't call it a King's Indian. That bishop is about, as you will see, is about to go to a7. Bishop to a7. Now comes one of the most humorous moments in chess history. The move bishop a7 was simply wrong. David should have played ab, knight takes c5, b takes c5, and I actually like black's position. I think black is doing okay, but what he played instead was a howler. Bishop back, b6, bishop takes a4, b7. Whoops. Oh dear. There goes the rook. Like, okay. Now, you know, you're red-faced in shame because, again, you're playing on the world stage. You got 1,000 people watching you, and you've just, like one of the world's best players, and you just blundered a rook. Now, it certainly has happened to me, and perhaps it's happened to you as well. So at this moment, besides the natural feelings of self-loathing, complete disgust that you might have for yourself, you really have to change your mindset. When you've blundered horribly and you're behind, what your mindset has to be is you know your opponent's winning, you know you're lost, he knows you're lost, and he wants his life to be as easy peasy. And what your job is to make small victories. You need to make small victories by creating problems for your opponent. So here you are. At the moment, black is an exchange down, but both bishops are hanging, so he's going to be a rook down. So if I can ask the class, you're faced this position, you're black, you're facing this position, what can you do? What can you do to make white's life that much more uncomfortable? You can resign, but that's not what we want. We want to create problems for white. Julia. So maybe, you know, first of all, let's look. You could play the move bishop takes d5. That gets a pawn for the rook. Bishop takes d5. Queen takes, attacking this pawn. I don't think white's going to have any problems converting the game, right? So so if bishop takes d5, queen takes a7 means lights out down the road, you've got to find a way of making white's life difficult, bishop b6. So now you're thinking as black that if you can maintain this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, white's queen is in a box. Yeah? Okay. Bravo. Takes. What to do with black? What to do? What can we do? Julian again? Sure.
Maybe
Queen to b5? Exactly. So queen to b5, this is basically your only way of annoying white from just castling, consolidating his position. Now I'm not 100% sure you want to take that pawn. Maybe you do. Maybe you give the queen, but at least you harass the knight. You don't make it comfortable for your opponent to castle. You harass the pawn, and so forth and so on. Now here I think Botvinnik went wrong, and he played the move knight c3. That basically is an invitation to capture the pawn. Knight c3 is fine. White is still winning. I mean, it's not even close. But if I were in white shoes, I would think that b4, sorry, let me just put this on the move position. Knight takes, knight c3 would have been a nice way to essentially, I'm a rook ahead. I've consolidated. Maybe on a good day, I will play bishop f1 and bring my queen to the d5 square with a check. And okay, it's a little, there's small discomforts, but it's a whole rook. But again, from black's point of view, black has to think how to create chaos, how to give my opponents problems. Okay, so now you've got a pawn, and maybe on a good day, if the king goes in that way, you got an f4, just to create problems, So Botvinnik, who's a whole rook ahead, master of correctness and everything else, he decides to take the victory right away. He plays rook takes a6. Now this actually is a move that black has to welcome. In the sense, if we go back here for a moment, basically that knight on b8 is stuck for as long as you can imagine, like that knight stuck. From white's point of view, white says, hey, I'll give back a little material, I'll give back an exchange. Instead of being a rook up, I'm happy to be a piece up because I'm completely winning, which is true. However, it helps black's position a lot. Like, that's a small victory. You've now blundered a rook, you've won an exchange back. Okay, you've also won a pawn. So what I thought Botvinnik should have done was castle. Just simply castle. It's like one of those situations where, your biggest fear is your opponent will do that. Well, you encourage him to do that. f4. There's nothing else for black to do that could harass white. You defend the pawn, and that's it. That's all that's happening. You could take this pawn on b2, but after rook a2, you're stopped. So I played knight here, takes, and here I've given up 2 pawns, but I've got a rook, and there's just nothing. There's no more problems that can be created. From white's point of view, he may start thinking about bishop h3, bishop e6, bishop takes, queen c6, getting his pieces out. He might just go rook e2, rook over to e1, and eventually round that guy up. And there's nothing black can really do further. Let's go back. So Botvinnik, rook ahead. What the heck? He can afford to be generous, sacrifices the exchange in order to grasp victory. Takes. Knight takes d5. Very simple. Queen a4. Another one of those nettlesome mistakes. Again, from Botvinnik, when Botvinnik played queen a4, he thought, doubtlessly he thought, I got this game in the bag. All I got to do is keep trading down, and my extra piece will win the game. This is another small error. He should have played the simple knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and in my opinion, king e2. Now you don't want to go castles because the bishop is hanging, but king e2 is absolutely fine. There's no attack that black can achieve. The worst he can do is, again, to be annoying, to grab some pawn. Now black has 2 pawns for a bishop, but it's really bad. Sorry, Jolene, yeah.
Was it possible for black to play f4 and sometimes I saw after king e2 and I play like f4 here?
f4 here. I don't know what you're going to do over there. I thought that king e2 was just supporting my queen to come back and consolidate. I don't know. Continue.
Maybe
Queen a2 here. So this is, again, pretty simple. I think I'm just going to go here. And if you go here, this was like a kind of a transposition of what I could get with the queen versus rook. But if I want to be a little bit, I don't know, I say bold, I could probably go, rook c1, I don't know. Let me try. No, I like queen d3. Queen d3 is a good move. Maybe I just go rook here. So I'll keep the goods. You know, I keep the pawns. You could trade twice on e3, but you're running out of ways of really being able to give me problems. Yeah, unfortunate. But in any case, king e2 was the right move. Pardon me. Pardon me. Knight takes d5 in this position, followed by king e2, and I think Botvinnik would have been in good shape, smooth sailing. Instead, queen a4. And now bishop takes e3. And it's sort of like, man, you know, a moment ago he was a rook down. Now he's a piece down, but he's got 2 pawns. But even worse is if you look at the pawn structure, all of black's pawns are intact. And they look really good. This knight on a4 is a little bit stupid. It's offside. This pawn on b2 is nobody's favorite. And, you know, now it's really nettlesome. Now it's not easy at all. Rook comes sliding over. b3. The problem with the immediate bishop c4, if I remember, was bishop c4, rook takes, bishop takes, king over to f8. Now you can't take, thanks to a back rank, you have to come king e2, but then there's takes and rook d4. Check. So b3 was Botvinnik's move, and now it's a real game. Like, what the hell just happened? You know, like you're playing for the world championship, you blundered a rook, and look at this, you know, you're right back in it. Now, every time this kind of thing is happening, like, you know, your opponent, you know, who's expecting you to resign and been expecting you to resign for the last few moves, they're getting more and more frustrated, right? Because it's sort of like, this lucky chump, man, he's getting away with murder over here. Rook c1, rook b8, knight c3, knight b4. It's really masterful. That's the only word I can use to describe Bronstein's play from this point onwards. It's sort of like he gets to do everything he wants. The rook on the c file has been closed. In a dream world, this pawn on b3 is blockaded. In a dream world, black could play c6, d5, king e7, king e5, and start running with a central avalanche. Bishop e2, I didn't like that move. I thought that was wrong. Yes, I thought that Botvinnik should have played rook a1 with the idea that after king e7, pardon me, let me just put this move, at least in this variation, he would have an active rook. If black puts his king, if black puts his king on d7, you could harass, white could play bishop b5 check and force him back. Julian.
After rook a1, why can't black take on d3 and take on b3?
Exactly. Let's have a look at that.
What's the question?
Sorry. The question is, I thought that the best move was rook a1. And Julian has asked, in that case, why can't we take this bishop and take on b3? And the answer is, after rook a7, what you really want to do is play the move d5. The problem with d5 is definitely not rook takes, escape. Definitely not rook takes c7, d4, but king c2. And the problem is knight takes d5. If you can't play d5, then this rook on the 7th, like a really horrible thing to allow would be something like rook takes c7 and a knight d5 in the future. That's like, not good. It's a knight versus pawns, and the knight is simply stronger in this particular case. But that was not Botvinnik. Botvinnik played bishop e2, rook a8, exclam, knight a4, c6, exclam, rook c4, and rook b8. So it's sort of like, in those last sequences of moves, this knight has moved from c3 to a4, not particularly good. The rook's a little bit better on c4, but not that much better. But now black has this beautiful blockade, and black's moves are getting easier and easier. King e7, d5, king d6. And Botvinnik has to start to think, okay, time to reel things in and, like shut things down. Bishop d3, king e7, knight b2, d5. Again, I remember playing over this game as a kid and thinking to myself, I like that structure, I really like these pawns. d5. Now, white had better be really careful here. What would you do if you're white? Keep in mind that essentially, if black gets to play e4 on his next move, this knight on b2 is doomed to a really awkward existence. Black is planning to go e4, king d6, king e5, and support his pawns. What do you do with white? Don't all answer at once. Dan, what do you think? What would you do?
Well, maybe we have to give you exchange.
But then you're really under a lot of pressure.
So then rook c5.
Rook c5, essentially you're kind of encouraging black to do what he wants to do, king d6. We need Julian.
Maybe here I would play rook h4, and after h5 I will play g4.
Exactly. That's it. I mean, now it was like Botvinnik was trying to save the game. It wasn't, you know, but you can't allow black to just get in all of his moves. Now after the tempo move h5, g4 is what Botvinnik played in order to break up and to get some activity for his pieces. Takes, f4. Well, again, after that little operation, black's pawn still looks scary. g5. So in order to prepare a rook check without allowing king f6. Rook f8. This was a really fine move. I was really impressed by this move when I played over the game. And hold on, what move are we at? Sorry. e4. Rook takes, king e5, and the game was adjourned. Here the game was adjourned, and much to my surprise, the players agreed to a draw. Whoa. So I'm sure David Bronstein was thrilled and delighted at spotting rook odds to, to Botvinnik and drawing the game. But on the other hand, if you kind of look at the position and kind of go, whoa, wait a minute, you know, f3, king d4, e3 check, this looks really amazing. Why did the players agree to a draw? Why didn't Bronstein play this out? And the best that I came up with was this move, bishop g4. Okay, so the idea becomes obvious in just a moment. You got to play f3, you know, to get that guy going. And then it was this check that was annoying. Now you can't step to f4. If you go king f4, oops, and suddenly that's a no. So you have to step to e5, from e5 to d4. And now comes rook f6 anyway. Okay. You can't afford to trade rooks, and then comes the sacrifice. And we get this position. Now, wait a minute, white's a pawn up, and he's threatening to go g6, or rook g3 and g6, and the best I could see was that they were going to make a repetition back and forth. Well, it's not beautiful, but as far as World Championship match games go, I mean, it was sure a fun one. I mean, I can imagine the audience just sitting down and seeing the player down a rook within inside of a dozen moves, and a Grandmasterly draw was the finish. Yeah, we prepared the whole game. So that was, a very, very entertaining World Championship match. One of the things that I found very interesting in going over many games of this match was how well matched the players were. I mean, there wasn't a lot of difference between the two players. And we'll all remember the famous game that Bronstein lost, that he had a draw and he just made one move blunder. Their match finished 12-12, yeah? But the rules at the time were that in case of a drawn match, the players were declared vice champions, if you will, but Botvinnik kept the title. So that meant that Botvinnik would have to wait for his challenger, and Bronstein would have to go through the whole process of interzonals, candidates to get back, and he didn't make it. Vasily Smyslov did. Any questions? It's all good? All right, until next time, we'll look at more drama, spills, and thrills from World Championship match games. Thank you. Have a good evening.